Single father carried groceries for the elderly woman, until one day his daughter opened the door and fell in love. The sun had just begun its descent behind the weathered rooftops of Maple Avenue, casting elongated shadows that danced across the cracked pavement. Every Thursday, Michael Hayes, a quiet man in his late 30s with calloused hands and gentle eyes, would walk the 3 blocks from his modest house to Mrs. Ellsworth's aging Victorian home. She was nearly 80, and her bones were as fragile as the lace curtains that fluttered behind her windows. Michael never expected anything in return. He carried her groceries, stacked her firewood, and sometimes sat in her warm kitchen sipping her weak chamomile tea, listening to stories about a time when her garden won blue ribbons at the county fair. On that particular Thursday, the air smelled faintly of impending rain, and the sky churned with clouds the color of old pewter. Michael balanced a paper bag heavy with canned soup and flour, his heart weighed down by his own private burdens. He was a single father, not by choice but by the quiet cruelty of fate. His wife, Lena, had died when their daughter, Eliza, was only 6. Since then, he'd lived in the hush of sorrow, never daring to imagine he'd feel anything but the hollow ache of her absence. He didn't know that everything was about to change. When he reached Mrs. Ellsworth's porch, he knocked lightly, the way he always did. But that day, instead of the elderly woman's frail voice inviting him in, the door swung open with a creak, and Eliza stood there in her cotton sundress, hair pinned back in a loose braid, cheeks pink with the first heat of summer. She was 19 now, no longer the shy girl who clung to her father's leg. She'd just returned home from college, carrying the restless hope of someone who believed the world still held bright surprises. And there, behind Eliza in the shadowed entryway, stood a young man Michael had never seen before. He was tall, with a lean build and eyes the deep, unguarded green of new leaves. He wore a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, exposing arms corded with quiet strength. He seemed startled to see Michael, but not embarrassed. He had the look of someone who felt he belonged wherever he happened to be. Eliza turned, her gaze lifting to meet the young man's. Something passed between them, something so tender, so unexpected, that Michael felt as if he'd stumbled into a story he didn't yet understand. "Oh, Dad," she said, her voice soft with wonder. "This is Samuel. He's Mrs. Ellsworth's grandson." Samuel stepped forward, extending a hand. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his tone respectful. "Thank you for everything you've done for my grandmother. She talks about you every time I visit." Michael shifted the grocery bag to one arm and shook Samuel's hand, surprised by the steadiness of the young man's grip. In that moment, he felt the old ache inside him stir and shift, as if some small, hidden door had cracked open. Eliza reached for the bag, brushing her fingers over her father's wrist in that silent way they had always communicated. She carried it inside, Samuel following close behind. Michael remained on the porch for a long moment, listening to their voices. Hers, bright with curiosity and a sweetness he hadn't heard in years, his low and earnest. Rain began to fall, thin silver lines that beaded on the porch railing. He didn't move, only let the cool droplets soak into his shirt. For the first time since Lena's passing, Michael felt the quiet shift of hope beneath his ribs. He recognized the look on Eliza's face because it was the same look he'd worn the first time he'd seen her mother. Inside, Mrs. Ellsworth sat in her rocking chair, her thin hands folded in her lap, her gaze shrewd and knowing. She caught Michael's eye through the doorway and smiled, a small, conspiratorial curve of her lips that seemed to say she had known all along what might happen if her grandson came to stay. That evening, Michael cooked supper alone. The house felt different, as if Eliza had brought something home besides her suitcase, something bright and invisible that wrapped itself around the worn edges of their lives. He heard laughter drifting down the hall, mingling with the rain that tapped against the window panes like a gentle reminder that seasons always change. The next Thursday, when he walked to Mrs. Ellsworth's house, Samuel was already there, helping her sort old photographs. He greeted Michael warmly, and together they lifted boxes from the attic, their movements easy, almost companionable. Michael noticed the way Eliza hovered near Samuel's shoulder, her eyes luminous with something she couldn't yet name. Days passed, then weeks. Michael began to look forward to Thursdays for reasons he hadn't expected. He saw how Eliza's sadness receded, replaced by the delicate bloom of first love. He caught Samuel glancing at her with an intensity that reminded him of his own youth, when he believed love was the one force strong enough to rescue a man from his own solitude. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes at night, he would see Lena's face, her smile untroubled, as though she were giving him permission to let the past loosen its grip. In the mornings, he woke to the sound of Eliza humming in the kitchen, the house no longer so quiet. One afternoon, Mrs. Ellsworth invited them all for tea. The old woman watched the two young people with a satisfaction that made Michael's heart ache. Afterward, as the sun slid behind the sycamore trees, Samuel walked Eliza home. Michael trailed behind them, their laughter drifting back to him like music he'd almost forgotten. When they reached the front gate, Samuel paused, his hand resting lightly on the peeling white latch. Eliza tilted her face up to his, the last golden threads of daylight catching in her hair. Michael stood a few paces away, pretending to study the neighbor's hydrangeas, but he could feel the hush between them, as if the entire evening was holding its breath. "Thank you for walking me home," Eliza said, her voice low but steady. Samuel's gaze didn't waver. "I'd walk you anywhere." Michael felt an unexpected warmth flood through him, a mixture of nostalgia and something like cautious gratitude. He knew he could have resented this boy for taking up so much space in his daughter's world, but instead he found himself relieved, almost comforted, that she was opening her heart again. He cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Samuel, you're welcome to stay for dinner if you'd like." Eliza looked over her shoulder, her eyes bright. Samuel hesitated only a heartbeat before he nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. I'd like that." They ate on the back porch, the table laid with Michael's simple cooking, grilled chicken, rosemary potatoes, a salad he'd tried to make look more ambitious than it was. Eliza did most of the talking, her hands animated as she recounted a story from school, and Samuel listened intently, his smile easy and unforced. Occasionally, he'd glance at Michael, as though searching for approval, and Michael, to his own surprise, found he didn't mind offering it. After they'd finished, Eliza insisted on clearing the plates. Michael and Samuel stood side by side at the railing, watching the last scraps of daylight fade beyond the fences. A breeze picked up, carrying the scent of cut grass and the distant promise of rain. She's remarkable," Samuel said after a moment, his voice hesitant, as if he wasn't sure whether he had the right to say so. "She is," Michael agreed, his gaze fixed on the sliver of moon emerging from the clouds. "Her mother was too." Samuel nodded, his jaw tightening, as if he understood something unspoken. "I'm sorry you lost her." "Thank you," Michael said simply. Inside, the plates clattered in the sink. He thought of all the dinners he'd cooked alone, the hollow silence that had trailed him through every room. And now here he was, standing with this young man he hardly knew, feeling as though the world had tilted back into some kinder balance. Later, after Samuel had gone and Eliza had retreated to her room, Michael sat on the porch alone. He could hear the low murmur of her voice through the window. She was on the phone, no doubt telling her friend everything. Her laugh drifted out into the evening, carrying with it the delicate hope he hadn't dared to name. He closed his eyes, letting the darkness settle around him. In the space where grief used to live, something new had begun to take root. It felt fragile, like a sprout pushing up through frozen ground, but it was there. And maybe he thought that was enough for now. Days slipped by, each one warmer than the last. Samuel came often, sometimes to help Mrs. Ellsworth, sometimes to bring fresh bread from the bakery where he worked part-time. He always found an excuse to linger on the porch with Eliza, their heads bent close together over her sketchbook or a novel she insisted he read. Michael watched them from the kitchen window, remembering what it felt like to be that young, to look at someone and feel certain the world had been remade just for the two of you. One Saturday afternoon, Michael found himself in Mrs. Ellsworth's living room, helping her sort a box of old letters. She looked up at him over the rims of her glasses, her expression soft with something almost like mischief. "You know," she said, folding a brittle envelope, "I think it's good for them, to have each other. Your Eliza has a tender heart. She needs someone who sees her." Michael's throat tightened. He knew she was right, and yet part of him still struggled to let go of the years when he'd been the only one Eliza depended on. It was strange to stand on the threshold of this new chapter, to realize he was no longer the center of her world. But when he thought of the way she smiled at Samuel, the way her laughter had returned, he knew he wouldn't trade it. That evening, as the sky darkened to a deep, forgiving blue, Michael sat at the piano Lena had loved. He hadn't touched it in years. The keys were cool under his fingers. Slowly, tentatively, he began to play, just a few bars of the song she used to hum while she cooked. The notes floated through the house, weaving past the memories and into the present, and for the first time in a long while, he felt Lena's absence ease. He imagined she would have approved of all of it, of Samuel, of Eliza's bright heart, of the quiet way hope had stolen back in. He kept playing until he heard the front door open. Eliza came in, her eyes shining from the night air, and stood by the piano listening. She didn't say anything, only reached out to rest her hand on his shoulder. And in that moment, Michael understood that love wasn't something that left when someone was gone. It remained patient, enduring, and when you were finally ready, it returned in unexpected shapes. The sky had turned the color of soft plum as the trio walked along the narrow lane, a hush falling over the world around them. Crickets chirped from beneath the hedges, and fireflies blinked like forgotten stars finding their way home. Michael watched his daughter walking just a step ahead, her shoulder brushing Samuel's every now and then. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. Their silences were filled with something new, an unspoken bond blossoming between breaths. It had been a long time since Michael had felt the world this alive. Not just outside, with its golden hush and flickering lights, but inside his chest, where something had long been dormant. Samuel looked back at him once, as if to silently ask for a blessing, and in that brief exchange, Michael saw not just the young man before him, but the quiet legacy of love that was unfolding. And somehow, it felt like Lena had her hand in it. Weeks turned into months. Samuel took up a job at the local library's restoration room, while Eliza volunteered for a nearby community art center. They became part of the fabric of the neighborhood, attending church picnics, helping with school fundraisers, and occasionally joining Michael and Mrs. Ellsworth for lazy Sunday lunches beneath the giant oak tree in the old woman's backyard. Michael, for his part, found his once lonely routine transformed. He still carried groceries for Mrs. Ellsworth, but now Samuel insisted on helping too, and Eliza often accompanied them, bringing with her a spark that made even the mundane feel sacred. He began fixing things around her house, sometimes staying late just to sit in the garden, exchanging stories with the elderly woman who had quietly brought their lives together. It was during one of those afternoons, crickets buzzing, the air rich with the scent of honeysuckle, that Mrs. Ellsworth reached across the weathered table, resting her thin hand over Michael's. "You've given so much to others without expecting anything in return," she said, her voice frail but unwavering. "But life always finds a way to return kindness. Sometimes, in the most unexpected forms." Michael didn't respond, but his throat tightened with something he couldn't quite name. The seasons changed again. Leaves fell, blanketing the town in burnt oranges and deep reds. Samuel built a small wooden bench outside the Hayes home, carving Eliza's initials into the armrest when he thought no one was looking. Michael saw it one crisp morning and ran his fingers over the carving, a quiet smile playing on his lips. Winter brought with it a soft snow, and the kind of cold that makes everything feel suspended in time. On Christmas Eve, the town square twinkled with lights and distant carols. Michael stood beside Eliza and Samuel, watching children build snowmen and chase each other in scarves too long for their necks. The three of them had become inseparable in ways that felt fated rather than forged. That night, over dinner, Samuel rose from his chair with a nervous smile and a small velvet box in his hand. Eliza's eyes widened. Michael felt his heartbeat pause as time slowed around the flickering candlelight. Samuel didn't speak to the room, just to her. "Eliza," he began, voice trembling slightly, "from the first moment you opened that door, you've brought warmth into every corner of my life. I fell in love with you in moments I didn't even know I was counting. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want it to be with you. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Eliza's eyes. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes." Michael, sitting at the head of the table, felt 1,000 memories rush through him at once. Eliza as a child dancing in the kitchen, the silence that followed Lena's death, the nights of worrying if he was enough. And now, here she was radiant with joy, choosing love. He stood slowly, walked to Samuel, and pulled him into an embrace. No words, just the strength of a father's acceptance and something deeper, hope renewed. The wedding was small, held in the garden of Mrs. Ellsworth's house, beneath the archway Samuel built himself. Mrs. Ellsworth watched from her chair with pride beaming brighter than the sunflowers blooming behind her. As Eliza walked down the aisle, arm in arm with Michael, the entire town seemed to breathe with them. Her dress was simple, her eyes glistened, and in that moment, she was a mirror of her mother, graceful, strong, endlessly kind. Michael placed her hand into Samuel's and whispered, "Take care of each other." The vows were spoken beneath the rustle of oak leaves, and a sky so blue it looked painted. And when they kissed, it was not just the joining of two hearts, but the merging of every quiet act of kindness, every Thursday grocery run, every small moment that had led to this one. As the guests laughed and danced under strings of lights, Michael sat with Mrs. Ellsworth, both of them wrapped in blankets, watching the children run barefoot through the grass. "You know," she said, a mischievous twinkle in her eye, "I knew this would happen the day I saw Eliza at my door." Michael chuckled. "Of course you did." Above them, lanterns floated into the sky like silent prayers. And as one drifted higher, Michael imagined Lena somewhere out there, watching, smiling, knowing that love had found its way back, not through grand gestures, but through the quiet beauty of everyday grace.